task of supervising that transformation. Honestly, I feel I'm not fit to be doing what I am doing, and I'm looking for somewhere else to go.
There were other problems as well. Guevara cherished his image as a romantic revolutionary, but as head of a national bank, it had become difficult to sustain.
There was a very quixotic aspect to Ernesto, and I think he despised money, he despised business. He wanted a world free of money. He was a utopian. And I'm sure that when he became an important figure in the Cuban bureaucracy, he must have been appalled at the fact that he was earning money.
He was an activist. He was a militant. He was a fighter. And there are all sorts of signs that he is restless and ill at ease in his office, especially when he's director of the National Bank, which he clearly found, a crucifixion.
He leaves Cuba on his first trip abroad in August or September of 1959, just 7 months after the revolution is victorious, triumphs, and takes Havana in January, off to represent the revolution all over the world in this long trip that takes him to India and to Indonesia and to Japan and to Egypt, all over the place. An important trip undoubtedly, an important mission undoubtedly, but one could also think that there were equally important tasks to carry out in Cuba at the time.
Guevara began to envisage a new role for himself as a revolutionary catalyst. Distancing himself from Castro, he wanted to free Cuba from its dependence on the Soviets. To achieve this, Cuba had to develop allies independently of Moscow. But because there were so few independent socialist countries, Cuba needed to create some more. Therefore, Cuba must promote revolution in other parts of the Third World. By 1964, Guevara had decided to put his theory to the test. Equipped with an elaborate disguise, he was about to set off to Africa. Despite his misgivings, Castro had decided to let him go. Years later, he was to explain his decision.
Y había un movimiento de lucha armada en Zaire. Esto nunca lo hemos publicado, pero entonces realmente el movimiento revolucionario nos pidió una ayuda, que le enviáramos instructores combatientes en una misión internacionalista. Él quería desarrollar unos cuadros, desarrollar más la experiencia, y lo hicimos responsable del grupo que fue a ayudar a los revolucionarios allí en el actual Zaire.
But the mission was a fiasco. As well as being badly organized, the Congolese rebels were divided about what role Guevara should play. Within weeks, the uprising had been quashed. From the outset, Castro had given Guevara's mission only qualified support. He told Guevara that the plan to incite revolution in the Congo ran the risk of offending Moscow. Despite past betrayals, Cuba still depended heavily on Soviet aid. They could not afford to put that at risk. Castro drew up an insurance policy. It was agreed that before Guevara left for Africa, he would write a letter distancing himself from the Cuban government. The letter was to be kept secret and used only in the event of crisis.
This is what was going to allow Fidel to distance himself from Che's operation in the Congo, if need be, for international reasons. If the Soviets were to begrudge him this intervention, if there would be a problem at the UN, he could always say, Che is now on his own. He's not Cuban. He's not a party leader. He's not a government official. He is nothing. He's my friend. I love him dearly. I'm helping him as much as I can, but it's his operation. It's his show. It's not Cuba's anymore.
Now, as Guevara languished in the Congolese jungle, Castro took stock. Guevara's unrelenting revolutionary zeal had become a liability. It was time to take care of the problem.
Del compañero Ernesto Guevara.
At a rally in Havana, he read the letter Guevara had given him in secret months before.
Siento que he cumplido la parte de mi deber que me ataba a la revolución cubana en su territorio, y me despido de ti, de los compañeros, de tu pueblo, que es ya mío.
Fidel tiene la tendencia de sacarle provecho a las personas, de usar a las personas. Cuando ya ha usado a las personas hasta donde él cree que le conviene, entonces busca la manera de deshacerse.
Castro had not consulted Guevara before disclosing the letter. Whatever his motives, the effect was devastating.
It created a big problem for Che. He was very upset about it. Because when he has to leave the Congo, he can't go back to Cuba. Literally, he has burnt his boats or bridges, except he didn't burn them, somebody else did.
Guevara knew that Castro had closed the door to his return to Cuba, but he held on to his dream of exporting the revolution. In Guerrilla Warfare, published in 1960, Guevara set out his theory of revolution and of the armed struggle needed to achieve it. It was to become the textbook for a generation of revolutionaries.
Guevara undoubtedly was regarded in the 60s as the most important tactician of guerrilla warfare. He wrote 2 books about the conduct of guerrilla war, which became, or were regarded really as manuals.
Guevara's heroic reputation as an exponent of guerrilla war was founded on the part he'd played in the Cuban uprising. But some of those who fought alongside him did not see him as a great military strategist.
Yo no creo que fuera un hombre brillante en el manejo de la lucha. Que hubo operaciones, varias, en donde el ejército derrotó a los rebeldes en la zona donde estaba el Che. Y yo sé que Fidel mandó a buscar a los capitanes y descargó la culpa a los capitanes. Y pasó por alto, pues, que el Che era el jefe del frente. Fidel lo protegió. Fidel protegió al Che. Y cuando el Che cometió sus fallas, no se las atribuyeron al Che, sino a los capitanes que estaban con el Che.
This film, showing the legendary rebel leader in action, was in fact shot after the revolution, during a reenactment. Like Guevara's reputation, it was an exercise in myth-building. Castro had been quick to recognize the propaganda value of the charismatic and good-looking young Argentine. And in making use of it, he created a legend in the minds of ordinary Cubans and in the mind of Guevara himself. November 1966. It had been almost a year since Guevara's humiliating defeat in the Congo. Since then, he'd been in hiding. Few were aware that he had arrived here, on the banks of the Nyancahuazu River in southeastern Bolivia. Along with a small group of Cuban fighters, he'd come to set up a base camp. His plan was to make a revolution that would spread throughout the Latin American continent.
This was an area that seemed to be ripe for revolution because there was a series of coups, there was a very important union movement, there was an important peasant movement, there was an important student movement. There seemed to be a lot of factors there on the ground that would make it ripe for revolution.
Guevara had brought just 12 guerrillas with him, 12 men, to take over an entire country. But the decision to bring such a small group had been a deliberate one.
Guevara believed that what is required to make a revolution is the existence of a small, tightly organized and absolutely dedicated, self-sacrificing group of revolutionaries who can in some way spark the revolution or make it happen.
But soon things began to go wrong. Before the campaign had begun, Guevara had thought that Bolivia's communists would be a key ally. But just weeks into the campaign, the party withdrew its support.